We got some good news. We got some not as good news. That could be good news to some of you in a certain way. Is Emmanuel Pregnon a starter at Oregon?
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks on this hump day. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Jamaree Caldwell's off to the NFL. Emmanuel Pregnon is a Duck. What does Oregon need to step up more, the defensive line or the defensive backs? That's a fun question. I'm going to answer that on today's show. But the big news is Oregon has added one of the top 15 players in the transfer portal, according to 24/7 Sports, and that is one Emmanuel Pregnon from USC. This guy is not what you'd call a spring chicken in college football. He has got a COVID year tossed in there. There are still a handful of guys who can get extra eligibility because of that, but Pregnon grades as a four-star transfer. He is very big for a guard, 6'5", 320 pounds. That mixes with Matthew Bedford in a way, who's listed at 6'6", 315. Typically 6'5", 6'6", that's a tackle frame, and guard is more in the 6'2", 6'3 kind of range. But Pregnon has been a starter for each of the last 3 seasons in college football. He was a class of 2020 recruit, and get this, I am firmly of the belief that stars matter. I just don't believe stars are everything to a team, a coaching staff, or a kid's potential. But he was a 0-star recruit. Did not have a composite score on 24/7 and committed to Wyoming. He did not play in the COVID season. He redshirted in 2021, and then in his 3rd season of college football was a freshman All-American. PFF had him graded that year as the number 3 guard in the Mountain West. Not too shabby. This past season, he played in all 13 games for USC and ended the year with a PFF grade of 70.9, which I enjoy bringing up around surrounding offensive linemen because it's impossible pretty much to rack up stats unless you're Janoris Wilson. I mean, guy caught a historic touchdown from Dylan Gabriel, so make of that whatever you like. But in the 3 seasons that he has played college football, which is why he has another year, so frankly it makes a lot of sense, his PFF grades have been 73.9, that was his first season at Wyoming, 65.2 at USC, and 70.9 this past year. That's a pretty, that's a pretty solid grade. I don't know that he comes in and is automatically a starter right away. I suppose, I think, I hypothesize the answer is yes. I just always think back to a couple of guys. First of all, Nishad Strother, he had an injury component to him in 2023, but looked on paper, he was East Carolina's highest graded PFF offensive lineman, and he did not come in and play, but he got dinged up, and we saw what he did this year. I thought he was quite good. I thought PFF gave Strother way too low of a grade. Now, it was just a shade under 70, which was Oregon's highest graded guard of the 4 that we saw this year. But I still thought Strother was much, much better than that. But this is a guy in Pregnon who has been a starting caliber player for an offensive line that hasn't been very good. Now, an offensive line is made up of 5 guys. But is this an all-world sort of talent like Isaiah World, frankly, or even a Johnny Cornelius? Their transfer portal rankings would indicate yes, but when I look deeper, I don't see a Cornelius level guy here. I see someone who comes in and you know what he's going to be able to deliver, and I think he's absolutely worthy of being a starter on Oregon's offensive line. Would I be surprised, though, if he gets subbed out from time to time for Dave Iuli? Absolutely not. I think Iuli right now is slotting in to be Oregon's 6th offensive lineman again. You've got Matthew Bedford coming back after taking just 2 snaps on the field for Oregon this year, and he's got a medical redshirt, so he can go for a 7th year of college football. This would be the 6th, of course, for Pregnon. Those could be your 2 starting guards. But, I mean, Iuli has regularly worked his way onto the field, and I don't think Pregnon based on the 3 seasons that he's played, is someone that, you have to have on the field at all times. You never take him off for any reason. Like Jackson Powers Johnson or Penei Sewell, Connerly, Cornelius, like these are not guys that ever get rotated in for or ever, ebb and flow along the offensive line as far as substitutions are concerned. But yeah, Pregnon is absolutely a solid addition. In fall camp, yeah, Dave Iuli could beat him out. PFF doesn't think that Iuli was as good of a player. And again, I thought Iuli was shortchanged because while 70.1 or 70.9 rather is a solid grade, don't get me wrong. 70 is good, 80 is great, 90 is holy smokes, you're out of this world. I don't think Oregon had a player on PFF that reached a 90 grade this year. Gabriel and Harmon, I think, were the closest ones. But if you look at that grade and think, okay, that's solid. He comes in. Maybe he's a solid starter, or maybe he's a part of the rotation again, because you still have Kavika Rogers in that room as well, who played snaps this year. But there was not a single other guard amongst Oregon's guys that had a 70 grade this year. So clearly, the staff agrees with what PFF's analysis is, which is this is a position where Oregon can clearly upgrade. And maybe we should have seen that coming with the way they played this position group, particularly towards the end of the season, where you had a rotation of Marcus Harper, Nishad Strother, and Dave Iuli, and a sprinkle of Kavika Rogers in there as well. I haven't seen that sort of thing before, and perhaps it was because they didn't feel like one guy was significantly better than the other. I definitely thought Strother was the best of the bunch, but he and Harper are now gone. You get Bedford back off of an injury this past year, and now you bring in Pregnon. And that's the other point that I think makes this highly sensical for Oregon in the offensive line room. Banking on a guy who is coming off of a serious injury that kept him out essentially the entire year. I think he maybe could have played at a couple spots, but that's not a position you want to be in. It's one thing to look at, the linebacker room and say, boy, if you had an injury to Bryce Betcher or Devin Jackson, you'd be relying on a lot of young guys really quickly in big spots. Well, Jackson and Betcher don't have an injury history. Bedford does. And it's really easy for offensive linemen to get rolled up on. It's hard to stay healthy as a big guy in general. So I think from that vantage point, it makes a lot of sense that if you do have to have this revolving door, you have 3 solid quality options. Now, another reason I am, let's say, lukewarm on this edition, which is to say I like it. I see why they did it. He's going into his 6th year of college football. If he was an all-world NFL prospect, he'd be going to the drafts like Josh Connerly is doing after his 3rd season. So this is a veteran. This is a solid starter. This is not a guy who I expect to, turn himself into an early round NFL draft pick based on what we've seen from him the first couple of years. But we've also seen Alik Terry do a masterful job coaching this unit over the last couple of seasons. So I certainly trust him more than USC's offensive line coach, because they have not had a good offensive line really in Lincoln Riley's entire tenure. That's been kind of the worst kept secret that's holding the Trojans back. Like, yeah, their defense needed to make improvements. They did this year. Why were they not good? Their offensive line wasn't any good. They couldn't run the ball consistently. They didn't protect the quarterback well, and they weren't very good late situationally in games. So just a quick other note, Bedford logged 2 whole snaps this year. No other guard for Oregon was over 250 of the rotation guys. Like Harper was Harper was in that sort of range, but then he had the injury as well. And Nishad Strother played the most snaps of anyone because he was the healthiest that played the most. But you add a veteran presence into the room, that is a good decision that I am absolutely on board with. I just don't have the expectation that he comes in and suddenly becomes this otherworldly player who's just a dominant force on Oregon's offensive line. I think this is a good, solid, logical move to give yourself veteran depth at a position where you just dealt with attrition throughout the entire year. So, let me know your thoughts below in the YouTube comments or hit me up on Twitter as well. So, that was one piece of news. Then there's the less ideal, shall we say, piece of news. Jamaree Caldwell is going to the NFL. What's the good side of that? Well, some of you are going to like it, even though you won't like not having him there. And all of you will like Wayfair if you go check it out. After the holiday hustle is nothing like giving your home a little TLC. I always find that decluttering and refreshing my space helps me get back into a routine. I'm a big routine guy. I know many of you are as well. Wayfair can help you with that. Whether you're tidying up, clearing out, or just want to give your space a new look to start the year, Wayfair has everything you need all within your budget. They've got a huge furniture selection. You can find pieces for any style, any budget. You're going to find what you want. And they have free and hassle-free delivery even for the larger items. Wayfair's website, easy to navigate. You'll find everything you need in no time. There's something for every style and every home at Wayfair, which makes it easy to tackle your New Year's home goals. Give your home the refresh it needs with Wayfair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. Second segment sips, as always. By the way, those snap counts, 196 for Davey Uli, 122 for Kavika Rogers, 707 for Marcus Harper, that's 707, and 836 for Nishad Struther. Can you guess who the next most snapped guard on Oregon's roster is from 2024? Bet you can't. It's Lipe Moala with 13. How about that? How about that? Name to watch, perhaps, for the 2026 rotation. But the latest piece of news for Oregon, roster-wise, Jamaree Caldwell is going to the NFL. So I certainly wish Jamaree all the best, and I think he can be a real solid NFL player. I think he gets drafted. I don't know what his grade is specifically. It's hard to know because there's so many different grades and analysts out there. It reminds me of that Frank Caliendo skit when he's Mel Kiper Jr. and he has on Todd McShay, and then Robert Flores is hosting the segment, and he just says, well, two of the greatest football minds in the world can't agree on literally anything. And then he goes into the spiel about hot coffee and cold coffee. It's great. Caliendo's amazing. Anyway, I digress. So Caldwell's going to the NFL draft, and I certainly think he can get drafted there. You know, Jordan Riley got drafted, who was a solid player for the Ducks a couple of years ago. He got taken in the 7th round. Caldwell's a far more explosive and disruptive player, at least during his time at Oregon. So I think Caldwell can find a role, can bounce around, make a team, and whatnot, which is not a given, of course, even if you get drafted, but usually it is. So hopefully he does, because every Sunday, I'm always rooting on the hashtag ProDucks out there. I'm all about it. Absolutely all about it. So Caldwell is gone, and whenever Oregon adds a transfer, there is an immediate discourse from Duck fans, not all of you, but a healthy number of you, enough to where I expect it, and I'm just used to it at this point, that are wondering why add a transfer and not give a young guy an opportunity. Well, that's the good news. Remember earlier in the show, to begin today's program, I said there's not as good news, but could be good news to some of you. Well, to those of you who want to see a lot of young guys see the field, you're probably going to get that on the interior of Oregon's defensive line now. Because you bring in Bear Alexander, the transfer from USC and one-time Georgia Bulldog as well. You've got Amari Washington, and I have recently been appointed, I humbly accept your nomination, as chair of the Amari Washington fan club. I'm working on hats. Just know that. There will be membership dues. I will make it worth your while. You get merchandise and a newsletter as well. But Washington's going to start, and Bear Alexander probably starts. And when you think of Oregon's interior, the defensive line this year, I'm looking at 3 guys that made a huge impact for the Ducks. Derek Harmon, Jamaree Caldwell, and then Amari Washington was an impact guy. And I think, frankly, we didn't see as many interior guys play as we would have if they'd been ready to roll here in 2025, because you had, Marion Winston before he transferred, lining up on the inside. Jordan Birch could rotate there from time to time, but the season before in 23, you had 4 defensive linemen consistently, because you had Casey Rogers, you had Taki Taimani, you had Brandon Dorlus, and you had Popo Amavai. And Oregon did a phenomenal job A lot of clearing the throat today. Don't know why. Of upgrading at that position, even though they lost all that veteran talent. And hopefully the Ducks can do that here. I'm not as optimistic because Harmon and Caldwell are beasts. Harmon is probably going to be a first-round pick. Guy's just an absolute force. And so, could Washington become that kind of guy? Yeah, sure. But remember, if they go back to a more traditional four interior defensive lineman, you're going to have not one but two young guys who are going to have to play a sizable role for Oregon's defense on the interior next year. And that's going to be some combination of Aiden Breland, Tioni Gray, Jericho Johnson, Zadavian Sims, Terrence Green as well, not Mikael Gardner. He transferred to Arizona State to be with Dilly, and I will root for Dilly from now until the end of time. He's doing awesome. But here are the snap counts for the guys who are going to be behind Bear Alexander and Amari Washington from this past season. Terrence Green, 36. Aiden Breland notably saw snaps in the Rose Bowl, 17. Tioni Gray, 23. Jericho Johnson, 6. Zadavian Sims, 3. It's not a lot. So if you're someone who said, I want the young guys to get a chance, here's your golden goose of an opportunity. This is going to be not in a starter's role per se, but a high-end rotation guy at a position where Oregon plays a lot of guys. You can't just lean on two interior defensive linemen. You can't just lean on two edge defensive linemen either. I mean, you're going to have Tatum Tuioti and Blake Purchase back and Mateo Uiagalelei, but a guy like Elijah Rushing could see a bigger role going into next season. So I think this defensive line unit and the recruiting classes of the last two cycles is about to pay off in a big way. And think about it like this as well. What if you have an injury to either one of those guys? Suddenly you've got someone who's seeing real snaps for the first time playing as an outright starter there up front. You're just one sprained ankle, one rolled up on, one anything away from having that happen. So I think this is why they brought in Bear Alexander, because they know the talent they have, and hopefully those guys will be ready come next season. But you want to have two guys starting up front who have real experience in college football. And Amari Washington got enough this year to where I think he's ready to easily make that jump. And I think Oregon's looking to see which of those guys are going to win out on that depth chart and which of those guys are ready to kind of be this year's Amari Washington, where you might be the third most impactful interior guy, but you make some plays from time to time and you get everybody excited about what you're going to do the following season when Oregon might need you to start. This is an incredibly natural and normal progression for guys in the trenches on either side of the ball to not really play their first year, even as blue chip prospects, and some guys are exceptions to that, right? We saw Purchase, Tuioti, and Mateo all play their freshman year. But on the interior, we haven't seen the younger guys play as much. Now they have a year to acclimate to the college game a little bit and practice and such. And next year, or 2025, this year, I guess, they'll play more. And then the next year, ready to be full-fledged stars. That's what Washington's path has been. Didn't see the field in a meaningful way in 23. In 24, he's not a starter, but he's a heavy rotation guy, shows maximum potential here, and now in 25, he's one of your starting defensive tackles. So, everybody that wants to see the young guy, you're going to see some young guys. And you could see other young guys in the secondary on Oregon's defense as well. There are a lot of different directions they could go. They've got Theron Johnson. They've got Dylan Thieneman coming over from Northwestern and Purdue respectively on the back end, but Oregon's losing 6 defensive backs from this year. Nico Reed, Jabbar Muhammad, Tyshim Johnson, maybe Kobe Savage, Brandon Johnson, Dante Manning. Those guys were all impact players. I don't know where the secondary depth chart is at. How healthy is Jalil Florence? Who's the most ready? Who's capable? I don't know. That's what spring football is going to be for. A lot of questions to answer on this Oregon team. But Caldwell's a pretty significant piece. I'm bummed that he's not coming back because Oregon's defensive line, I think, would be better with him than without him. I do still feel solid about the guy because you're not asking anyone to fill a role I don't think they're capable of. These were highly rated guys coming out of high school who are going into their second or third season. That's when you should be ready, and hopefully they are. Speaking of that defensive line, I got a fascinating question, which I got a lot of, and I'm always down to answer. YouTube comments, Twitter, become a Locked On Ducks insider. Always get mailbag questions here. Insiders get priority access and other perks as well, of course, but D-line or DBs, who's got to step up more? Well, we're going to talk about that. First, though, we're talking about Rocket Money because they're bringing this episode to you, and I hope you're enjoying it. I certainly am. I always do. Rocket Money can help you find subscriptions you forgot about or were paying for twice. You know how foolish you would feel? Well, Rocket Money is here to help. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right, let's wrap things up with a couple of mailbag questions, one of which is really good. One of which is mildly heartbreaking, but curious to ponder as well to just add to our constant state of despair as Oregon fans. So get ready for that. This one from Rusty Animations. Question, would you rather have a better defensive line or a better secondary? That's tough. The instinct, I suspect, of most Oregon fans here is I'd rather the secondary be better. Now, I don't know whether you're asking this question holistically of would you rather be stronger up front or stronger on the back end, or would I rather Oregon's defensive line improve or Oregon's secondary improve? My answer is defensive line pretty consistently. So I first heard this from a podcast I listened to, John Middlecoff, 3 and Out. I think he's a fun listen, talking about the NFL. His ad structure is weird, but he's a former scout, and he's talked about this several times on his show before, that in his view, when he was in the NFL for a long time, mostly with the Eagles and the 49ers, and he doesn't like Chip Kelly, which is, something I just kind of have to forgive with him. But other than that, he's great. But what he said is that when they evaluate players and how to build a roster, your defensive line is far more important than your secondary. He thought most secondary guys were pretty average and that there aren't that many truly great ones out there. And what is the best friend that a secondary player can possibly have? A defensive line that is disruptive. Because if a quarterback doesn't have time, or if he's off his rhythm because he's getting hit all the time, or if he can't make the reads because there's a guy in his face, you can have a completely busted coverage that doesn't get exploited because of the defensive line. They have the ability to take that away. Now, a secondary player can also be so good they account for a defensive lineman who is not able to get pressure on the quarterback and he has too much time to throw. But far more often, I don't care if you put Deion Sanders back there or prime Darrelle Revis or Richard Sherman. If you make them cover for 6 to 7 seconds, guess what? Someone's going to get open. Someone somewhere. So it doesn't matter how good you are at that position group if your defensive line isn't any good. So frankly, do I want Oregon secondary to improve? Of course. Yeah. There were things we saw against Ohio State, and we've kind of seen it the last 2 years now in the biggest games of the season. The secondary has not been good enough in coverage. But also, the defensive line hasn't been able to consistently get pressure. Now, part of that is game plan, I think, against Ohio State, and frankly, against Washington as well in the Pac-12 championship game. Oregon tried to get pressure, and losing Jordan Burch certainly hurt, but Washington shifted to max protection and said, I dare you to cover these guys. And Oregon wasn't able to do that. And they got wide receivers on safeties. That's been a mismatch for 2 years in a row now. And that's something that certainly needs to change. Hopefully Thieneman can do that coming over from Purdue. But yeah, on the whole, I would rather have a better defensive line or a great defensive line than a great secondary, because a great defensive line elevates whatever you have in the secondary. For this Oregon team specifically, there's clearly more room to grow in the secondary, but there's going to be a lot of turnover there. So that's going to be a really challenging thing to ask, even though you have plenty of talent and some experience in the room. There are going to be plenty of question marks. And boy, that spring game in a few months is going to be really, really interesting to see who stands out. So that's a really good question. Now, we're all going to ponder this one together and once again think about what could have been. This from Willie_Park77. So blame him, not me. 2 questions. First, who would Oregon have played in the national championship this year if we were still in the BCS era? And who would you have picked to win the game? Second, if I was to send you fan mail / Oregon themed decorations, would you put it in your set for the podcast? Love the pod, go Ducks. So first things first, I've actually gotten several of these requests recently. I love and appreciate all of you out there. I'm not going to give you my mailing address. I'm not going to get things in the mail from strangers. Until we have an interaction in person at the very least, just as a general rule, I have legitimately had 3 offers in the last 10 days alone. Hey, I want to send you something. I appreciate it. Seriously. Thank you. You guys allow me to come on here and make this my job all year round. And it's awesome. I love it. You don't need to send me stuff. I'm okay. I'm okay. Mentioned recently, I've got the Ken Griffey Jr. thing up there for the set. I'm always looking for that sort of stuff. No doubt about it. But I'm not going to let you send me stuff. That's just a personal thing. I just don't feel totally comfortable with it. I hope you can understand. Okay, back to your question here, Willie. The answer is Georgia or Notre Dame based on the college football playoff committee's rankings. In the BCS era, there's a solid shot it would have been Notre Dame. By the way, I think Oregon beats either of those teams. Look at me sounding like an SEC fan by declaring my team undefeated in hypotheticals. But Notre Dame has the record at 11-1, but would they have had the wins, and the loss to Northern Illinois might have killed them there? I think you would have probably seen Georgia, who would have been with a backup quarterback. Yeah. Oregon keeps having the wrong seasons in the wrong era. Like 2012, lost to Stanford. If you just had a 4-team playoff, I'm pretty sure Oregon gets in. I believe the Fiesta Bowl was either number 3, number 4, or number 4, number 5 when they played Kansas State, and of course won the football game. But that was supposed to be the national championship, and then both teams lost close to the end of the regular season. So, yeah, that would have been great for a 4 or 12-team playoff. 2010 obviously worked out. 14 worked out. 2023, 12-team playoff, they're in. 2022, they're probably not. With the Oregon State loss, that would have eliminated them. So, hey, that's actually good timing. It kept Oregon out of the Pac-12 championship game, but they weren't going to go to the playoff. So, at least there's that. 2019 would have made the 12-team playoff and gotten beaten pretty badly by a good team. 2015, 9-3, maybe they sneak in. Team got hot at the end. They lost 2 games with backup quarterbacks in there, so... Yeah, the seasons are just really poorly timed. Like Earth and Mars alignment in The Martian, and Donald Glover puts it all together that you just got to keep the Hermes out there for another year and a half and whatnot. So I watched that movie recently, if that wasn't obvious. But yeah, probably Georgia or Notre Dame. I like Oregon's chances, neither of those spots. That magical season is going to arrive. It's a matter of when, not if. Do we know when? Who's to say? Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.